You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
And now, a word from our sponsor, TrueFort. TrueFort knows that cyber attacks are not devastating unless they're allowed to spread. TrueFort uses the EDR agents you already have installed to provide a clear understanding of the activity within your application environments. From containerized to legacy bare metal servers, TrueFort maps all behavior within applications to ease your enforcement of microsegmentation policies and service account protections. Learn why the world's largest enterprises trust TrueFort to give them control over lateral movement at www.truefort.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems, and protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
The first case that I got when I moved over to Permiso was with this threat actor. And it was a very interesting threat actor in the sense that it didn't look anything like what we typically see. Not a lot of automation, a lot of GUI tools, and a lot of mistakes along the way that were kind of funny that stood out.
That's Ian All, Senior Vice President of Permiso's P0 Labs. The research we're discussing today is titled Unmasking GUI-Vil, Financially Motivated Cloud Threat Actor.
But effectively still able to be super effective at doing their main mission, which was crypto mining in this environment. So thousands of dollars of resources from the client used for very small gains on the crypto mining side, about $7 a day in one instance. But they were able to spin up so much infrastructure that it was very impactful to our client.
Well, before we dig in too deep, just selfishly, I want to tip my hat to you and your colleagues for actually including pronunciation guidance in your research here. So often, as everybody who's listening to this who's into cybersecurity knows, there'll be some interesting, fun, unique name for something, and nobody has any idea how to pronounce it. And I find that often I am one of the people whose job it is to pronounce it. So thank you for taking the guesswork out of that. Just, again, selfishly, I appreciate it. And for you and for everyone else who's listening, please do more of that.
Yeah, that's great. With naming's actually been kind of a controversial subject lately for groups. And I figured, I'd try to make everybody mad by doing the boring Mandiant style name as well as a funny pun with it.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into the research here. Can you walk us through what exactly is going on with this attacker?
Sure, absolutely. So a pretty common method for initial access with cloud threat actors is just finding keys publicly accessible. And that's what this threat actor will do most commonly. They do have some exploits that they'll do against vulnerable GitLab instances as well. But generally, even in those situations, the goal is find an access key that they can then use. Access keys, in general, are just so prevalent publicly. Everybody knows like GitHub and the like. They occasionally will have keys linked to GitHub or other code repositories, but there's other places that people don't really even think about, like Android applications. When you're packaging up your Android application, oftentimes organizations bake their keys right in, and threat actors with just basic knowledge of strings and regex can grab those keys real easily and leverage those. And that's what's happening here initially. They get a key. Now they're going to see what they can do with it. And for this threat actor, the reconnaissance is mostly done again with GUI tools, hence the GUI-Vil name. So they'll throw it into a utility they call S3 browser. It's a particular version as well, which is kind of interesting. It's a version from like January of 2021 that they've never updated. So it's S3 browser 9.5.5. It's a pretty common utility that some admins will use for uploading and modifying files in S3. But what they use it for instead is, well, sure, they're going to look at S3 and see what's available in there, but it has some basic tooling for modifying and interacting with IAM, the identity management solution for AWS. Yeah, so they'll take IAM portion of that, and is for us on the detection side, because that's what I care about most, is like, how do we detect these in the future? S3 browser usage for downloading files, uploading files, common that organizations around the world will do that. S3 browser usage for interacting with IAM, very rarely do we see anybody that's doing that that's not doing it for malicious purposes. So it always ends up being this group there.
So once they're in, what are they after?
Ultimately, they want to be able to deploy EC2 instances to do their crypto mining on. So they're going to do everything they can to lead up to that. So if the credential that they first have doesn't have the permissions to do EC2 instances, to run an EC2 instance, they're going to escalate their privileges. They're going to look for methodologies to make sure that they can stay in the environment while doing this as well. Oftentimes, at least in cloud, identities are just grossly overprivileged. So they don't have to do a lot of privilege escalations in general, but occasionally they do. And in one of the instances, they had a read-only credential, and that read-only credential had access to S3 buckets. They searched through those S3 buckets, looking through flat files, found a Terraform TF state file, which is a juicy target for a lot of threat actors because it often contains credentials and other information about the environment. And they grab that. So now they have administrative privileges. Once they have administrative privileges in the environment, they want to make sure that if somebody else discovers this key that they discovered, or a defender finds out that they have access to this compromised credential, that they have another way back in. So they'll create other users, create other access keys, or in certain situations where they want to be low and slow and go below the radar a bit more, they look for existing identities that don't have login profiles set, meaning that they can't log into the AWS management console. Maybe they only have access keys associated with them. And what they'll do is they'll create a login profile for that existing identity, essentially taking over whatever permissions that identity has. And the reason they go about that is a lot of organizations, while like detection in the cloud is really low bar, in my opinion, what a lot of organizations do pretty well is monitoring new IAM users that are created, new access keys that are created. But not many organizations are watching for when a existing user's password is reset or a login profile is created for them when they didn't have one previous. So it's a way for them to fly under the radar there.
Are most people looking for any type of privilege escalation? Like you're saying, if I've assigned someone read-only access and that gets flipped to where they can suddenly write, am I likely to get an alert about that?
Not in any native solutions in the cloud. A good, mature organization is probably monitoring that a little bit better. But generally, no, it just doesn't happen. They're not monitoring for big changes. And in addition to that, like I mentioned before, they don't even really need to go that route often because everything's so overprivileged. When we look across all of our clients that we've ever had, we see that roughly 4% of the assigned permissions that an identity has are ever used. To give you an example of how grossly overprivileged, and that's to include your CSPMs, your security vendors in your cloud are also overprivileged grossly.
Wow. So they're in your environment here and they're set on doing some crypto mining. What sort of infrastructure do they set up for themselves to do that?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of the cloud, right? So now that they're in the AWS Management Console, they have the ability to spin out EC2 instances. They're just going to go region by region, switching and deploying as many as your resource constraints allow. And they're going to be spinning up big EC2 instances too. So from a size-wise, these are all in the large to extra large range. But to put that in perspective, these are machines that cost roughly $5 to $50 a day versus maybe smaller machines that are not even $1 a day. So they're spinning up big EC2 instances to do their crypto mining. And occasionally, again, they'll reach resource limitations that a client will have set on a region, and then they'll just switch over to US West, and then they'll switch over to AP South, and so on. Keep going. They don't even really do a whole lot of profiling first to see which regions have what resources available. They just kind of go and deploy as much as they can, and once they hit a limitation, that's when they stop.
So would it be fair to say that once they're in and up and running, that they're not trying to be particularly stealthy?
Yeah, I would say they don't have to be. Attackers will work only as hard as they have to, and again, just a really low bar on detection in general in cloud environments. There's so much activity, so much log data, and just not a lot of folks have gone down the path of really building up a big detection and response program in the cloud. They don't have to take a whole lot of steps because oftentimes they're not noticed until somebody gets a big bill.
Right. A big bill indeed it could be.
Oh, super big. Yes. We've had clients where hundreds of thousands of dollars are out the door before they notice.
In terms of how long they're able to stay in an environment, do you have any sense for what a typical occupation is for them before somebody catches on and boots them out?
Yeah, so I guess this might be a little bit of a bias because we monitor for them pretty heavily in our clients. So as soon as they are in, we notice them because they have a very specific set of TTPs that we monitor for. So we're able to get them out of there pretty quickly, but there are situations where we'll plug into a client and do our 90-day back scan and start seeing evidence that, they've been here already. They've been here a while. So yeah, in some environments, we're talking months. In others, we're catching them as they're deploying their stuff and trying to eradicate them from the environment before they can do too much damage, which is actually another interesting thing about these guys is they don't give up. A lot of threat actors, like from back in my Mandiant days, anytime we'd run into Fin5, as soon as they saw a Mandiant agent touch the box, they're gone. They'll come back 8 months later once Mandiant's done with their investigation and try again. Whereas, these guys, they're fighting every step along the way. They're not just, fighting, but also like monitoring what you're doing. So they'll look at CloudTrail logs themselves to see, what steps is this organization doing to try to stop me, to try to get me out of this environment, and how can we get around those?
Do you have any sense for who's behind this? What part of the world they're coming from?
Yeah, all the traffic sources out of Indonesia, it's hard to say, obviously, like in a world where VPNs are everywhere. They could be anywhere in the world, but I would put my bets on Indonesia, especially given that over the last 2 years we see them only from these very two specific ASNs. The time frames that they do their work in is kind of after hours for Indonesian working hours, which leads me to think it's somebody gets done with their job at work, and him and his friends, or them and their friends, then start doing their after hours, more lucrative financially job there.
And do you have any sense for what kind of numbers we're talking about here in terms of a take?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't have specific numbers. Here's what I will say. From my perspective, Permiso, where I work now, we're a relatively small company, recent startup. If we're coming across these folks a half a dozen times over the course of a year, that gives you a good indication of how prevalent they may be everywhere. Monitoring some of their wallets, it looks like they've done well, but it's hard to say how well without having a bit more data points.
Yeah. So what are your recommendations then for folks looking to protect themselves against this? How should they come out that?
Yeah, so a few things. Obviously, monitoring for compromised credentials is a place where I would focus a whole lot of efforts, because this is where everybody's getting their initial access, not just GUI-Vil, but Team TNT, all the various threat actors out there that are commoditizing the cloud space, they're all getting in via compromised credentials. So knowing what different access looks like, knowing what different activity looks like, and understanding what signals are associated with trying to gain access, maintain access, escalate privileges. Those things are really important to monitor in your cloud environments. So I guess that would be kind of number one there. And then in addition to that, implementing least privilege is really actually relatively easy to do in the cloud. You have all the data to be able to make those decisions. It's just kind of hard to manage for all your individual identities. So I definitely recommend every client I ever look at in their environment grossly overprivileged on every identity, every credential. That leads to situations like this where somebody can get in and grab an account that maybe isn't meant to do EC2 things, but has that permissions anyways, and be able to spin that up. So implementing least privilege, super important. When we start measuring kind of maturity in the cloud, we measure kind of human access to machine access. And you'll notice as you start seeing more mature organizations that infrastructure as a code is really prevalent. No human change ever occurs. In fact, in some of our more mature environments that we monitor, there's never a console login, right? Except for break glass situations, it doesn't really occur. So keep traveling on that maturity curve. Get yourself to a point where you're not doing a whole lot of human manual change in your environment, and it's all done through infrastructure as code.
To what degree do you think that these folks are sophisticated in their targeting, or are they perhaps opportunists?
Definitely opportunists. That they're just whatever keys they can find, they're gonna give it a go. They're gonna try. So definitely opportunistic there. As far as sophistication in general goes, it's something I kind of battle with these guys. Oftentimes, you associate GUI tools with people who maybe are less skilled. I think we used to have a somewhat derogatory term of like GUI jockeys back in the day, right?
Right.
Things like that. But at the same time, they're doing things that are very smart as well. Like when they get into an environment, they're tailoring their attack to that environment. So if they're going to create a new user, they're going to look at what your existing users are named. In one situation, they had like an IT audit, an external audit. So they saw that, hey, they're just adding this suffix of underscore audit at the end of all these accounts. We're going to make our own. We'll call it sec underscore audit. So they're doing some smart things as well. But on, I guess, the other side of that too, because they're using S3 browser as their tool set, they oftentimes are moving a little too fast for their own good and leave defaults in. So one of the first times I realized we were definitely looking at the same group again was when I saw them try to create a policy, but they left the template of your bucket name, here in the resource section of that policy. And we'd seen that in a previous instance of them as well. And they're just moving too fast sometimes for their own good.
I'm curious, from a personal point of view, for you as a researcher, how does a group like this rank? Is this the type of organization that it's fun to chase down?
Interesting. Yeah. So I would say as far as cloud attacks go, this is a funner one. Any investigation is always fun on my side. Not always great for, the client when you have to deal with it. But there's so much, the most prevalent attacks that we see in cloud right now are more crypto mining, but in an automated fashion. And also SES, simple email service, for sending mass mail or mass text messages abuse. And those are so automated to the point where you know exactly what API calls are going to come in what order, in what timing. And it kind of gets monotonous from a personal stance where I don't want to deal with those types of cases anymore. It's like kind of back in the old Mandiant days where I don't really want to do another ransomware case. Can I have one of the more fun ones this time? Yeah, so GUI-Vil, on the other hand, it's always a little bit different. And they're always adaptable. And they're also fighting back when we're trying to eradicate them from the environment as well. So again, while not great for clients, fun for a researcher, for an incident response person.
thanks to Ian All from Permiso's P0 Labs. The research is titled Unmasking GUI-Vil, Financially Motivated Cloud Threat Actor. We'll have a link in the show notes. Dreamport is a mission accelerator that combines state-of-the-art facilities, innovative programs, and imaginative people charged with finding that spark that leads to unparalleled capability. Headquartered in Columbia, Maryland, Dreamport was created through a partnership intermediary agreement with U.S. Cybercom, awarded to Missy in May 2018. For more information, please visit dreamport.tech. The CyberWire Research Saturday podcast is a production of N2K Networks, proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Elliot Peltzman, our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. Hello, listeners. We're always looking for ways to improve the CyberWire network to give you an intelligence-driven news experience that saves you time and keeps you in the know on the latest developments in cybersecurity. We'd like to hear your feedback in our 2023 audience survey. Complete this survey for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Visit thecyberwire.com/survey. That's thecyberwire.com/survey and share your feedback. Thanks.